In the first week of June 2025, 5 airlines flew between Havana and Madrid. Iberia, Air Europa, World to Fly, Plus Ultra, and even Air China. It's a strange number considering how isolated Cuba is from the rest of the world. Even JFK to Heathrow didn't have 5 airlines serving it until 2021. Then, in recent years, big European airlines like Condor, Virgin Atlantic, Finnair, and KLM have dropped Cuba altogether. Plus Ultra, a Spanish charter airline, is currently operating flights, or so it seems, on behalf of Cuba's national airline, Cubana. While Cubana has its own aircraft that can also fly long haul, like the Russian-built Illusion L-96, which can reach Europe non-stop, the airline has had trouble in recent years keeping planes like these flying. Spare parts are hard to find since they often come from Russia, and the aircraft often don't meet the noise and performance standards set by the European Union. As a result, Cubana has relied heavily on other operators like Jordan Aviation, High Fly, Plus Ultra, and Euro Atlantic to operate its international flights. As Cubana is owned by the Cuban government, its main incentive to keep service to cities like Madrid isn't really for profit, but rather for diplomatic and political reasons. Since Cuba was a former Spanish colony for nearly 400 years, the government has a big incentive to keep service there, even if it has to contract that service out or where it's hard to book flights. And since profit isn't really the main driver to keep service, charter operators like Plus Ultra, we can assume, have an incentive to serve these routes, since the same economics that apply to airlines that do need to try to make a profit don't really apply. Ironically, Spain's main and largest international airline, Iberia, takes a similar approach when it comes to contracting out its planes, despite being privately owned and having plenty of wide-body international planes like the Airbus A350s available to fly to Cuba. They often outsource their flights to Wamos Air or Iberojet. The reason? Flying to Cuba isn't very lucrative, but Iberia not only has an incentive to keep the route because it's the main airline of Spain, but also because Iberia is the most efficient when it comes to connecting people in Cuba to the rest of Spain and Europe and vice versa, thanks to the large Iberia hub in Madrid, where Cubans can connect onwards to other destinations like Italy, where over 20,000 Cubans live, and where no airline currently offers regular scheduled service into Italy. By contrast, Air Europa has been the most consistent when it comes to serving Cuba with their own planes since about the late 1990s, where it also plans to expand their service to daily by July 2025, which is more than twice the amount of flights that Iberia offers, which may also be surprising given that Cuba has infrastructure issues, energy blackouts, a shrinking population, and inconsistent tourist demand. But one thing stands out: the diaspora demand. There are over 200,000 Cubans that live in Spain, and this number has been suggested to have grown by about 50,000 since the early 2020s. So because Air Europa has daily flights, or soon will, depending on when you're watching this, they are the best positioned to take advantage of this demand. Then there's another Spanish leisure airline, World to Fly, which also tries to capture this demand by offering an additional 2 weekly flights on the A350-900, which offers 432 seats. But perhaps the most unusual airline flying Havana to Madrid is Air China. Air China originally launched service to Havana via Montreal on a route to Beijing back in 2015, where the Montreal to Havana flight had fifth freedom rights, meaning passengers could solely travel between Montreal and Havana, which was great for Canadian vacationers. The timing was also super strategic since the current president of China, Xi Jinping, made a state visit to Cuba just the year prior, signing all sorts of deals in agriculture, telecoms, and infrastructure. But it also happened to be around the same time when the US was fostering closer ties with Cuba as well, even potentially getting up to restoring diplomatic relations for the first time in over 50 years. So really, Air China's return to Cuba would be about expanding influence in the region through aviation, potentially beating the US, even though they serve entirely different markets. But the Canada stopover had many problems. Chinese-Cuban transit passengers needed a visa to go through Montreal, which was extremely hard to get. And besides the few Canadian vacationers who may have gotten a good deal on this flight, there really wasn't a lot of demand. It also didn't help that Air China flew one of its biggest planes, the Boeing 777-300ER, with over 300 seats, most of which went out empty when it flew between Montreal and Havana. Then the route was suspended in 2020, and in 2022, Canada limited the amount of flights between Canada and China to just 6 flights per week, including an outright ban on flights to Beijing, which lasted until almost the end of the year in 2024. Before that cap was lifted, Air China announced its intent to resume flights to Havana, but through Madrid instead. This solved the visa problem, since most transit passengers going through Europe or the EU, Spain, didn't need a visa to do so, or don't need one. It also allowed Air China to take advantage of the vast Cuban diaspora in Spain and beyond. Still, it's been reported that the route still goes out with a lot of empty seats, even though now it's operating on the smaller Boeing 787-9. So why keep flying it? To maintain influence and power in the region. Air China doesn't even serve Miami, despite the business ties there and the largest Cuban diaspora in the world. So instead, the route seems to be more symbolic, a gesture of commitment to Cuba. Want to learn more about airline routes and stuff? Check this out.